Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Ant, how you been?
Good, James. It's good to see you.
Well, stop yelling at me. That'd be a good start.
James is hungover from having been to Vegas. You've been talking to a lot of our fans there.
It's always nice meeting people, but as a hardcore introvert, I don't really know what to do. So I tend to find dark corners and go and hide.
Before I get into my interesting topic for the week, I want to note that you and I have done since we started Words and Numbers, to make this podcast accessible and interesting to inquisitive non-experts of all ages. Last week, we received an email from listener Mary Starbird, who says that she was recently on a road trip with her 9-year-old, Amy. Amy not only asked to listen to Words and Numbers, but asked for a specific episode in which you point out some ridiculousness going on in San Francisco.
Oh, it was probably when people were pooping on the sidewalks.
It was, I don't know what it was. I mean, you've knocked on San Francisco several times.
And we get hate mail because I knock on San Francisco. There are apparently people living in San Francisco who are forced to listen to the podcast against their will, who then feel the need to write in and tell me that it's really the greatest thing in the world. But, it's not. People are pooping on the sidewalk. Let's be realistic.
Amy, James and I are impressed that you listen to Words and Numbers and super impressed that you like it enough to have a favorite episode. Our own children think we're lame and that Words and Numbers is nerdy. So we're delighted that you think that we're cool enough, or at least I'm cool enough, to deserve your attention.
We're probably going to have to talk about that later, but...
Meanwhile, listener Harley Bird Whisperer, and that's his YouTube nom de plume, says, quote, "I've liked a lot of your stuff, but please quit bashing where I live. I like it a lot."
Is it San Francisco?
Yeah, Harley, I've been to California a number of times. I agree with you that it's a beautiful and fun place, though I think James disagrees. But here is a good opportunity to underline an important distinction that James and I make often. Our dismay is not with California, but with California's government. As with the United States at large, a society and its government are not the same thing, and often they are very, very different things.
I lived in California for 4 years. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about.
So to both of you, Harley Bird Whisperer and Amy Starbird, we thank you for listening. And Amy, if economics and government continue to interest you, drop us a note in a decade or so, and we'll be happy to give you some free advice on where to go to study these things in college.
So now, Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I want to talk this week about moral hazard. We want to avoid risk, so we acquire insurance. But insurance, in reducing the cost of accident, gives a person an incentive to expend less resources avoiding the accident. And that's what moral hazard is. For example, imagine you just bought a $30,000 car and had the car fully insured. If you have an accident, the insurance company will put the car back exactly as it was before the accident at no cost to you. Now imagine a different scenario. You just bought a $30,000 car and have no insurance. Any accident, dent, or scratch you suffer is yours to fix. How differently will you behave in these two scenarios?
In that second scenario, I'm going to hang tires around my car like a tugboat.
Yeah, exactly. Other things equal, people will tend to drive and park more carefully in the no insurance scenario. Or another way of saying the same thing is that people will tend to drive and park less carefully when they're insured. And that's moral hazard. The fact that you're insured alters your behavior such that you act less carefully. And this, interestingly, is why insurance policies have deductibles. When an event occurs in which the insurance company has to pay out money, you're responsible for the first bit. That's the deductible. For example, if you're in an accident, you're responsible for, let's say, the first $500 in damages. Insurance covers everything beyond that. The deductible is an attempt to mitigate moral hazard. That is, because you know that if you're in an accident, you're out $500, you'll tend to drive more carefully. In turn, this means the insurance company is less likely to have to pay out, and that means your insurance premium will be lower. So weirdly, having to pay a deductible actually makes your insurance less expensive. And that brings me to the Hyatt Hotel Mauna Lani Point in Hawaii. The hotel has started adding a damage waiver fee. Apparently, tired of having to eat the cost of damages to rooms, Hyatt now charges guests a $79 fee for insurance that covers up to $1,500 in damages to the hotel room.
So you can't opt out of this?
That's unclear to me from the article.
That's a way to just soak everybody for another $79.
Well, but here's the problem. Because of moral hazard, the insurance actually gives guests an incentive to be less careful, and so may actually increase the incidence of room damage.
If I weren't so old and infirm, I might decide to go there and behave like Led Zeppelin when they were on tour and start heaving televisions out the window and the whatnot. But you see that it only covers up to $1,500.
Yeah, it's only up to $1,500. But nonetheless, I mean, you've got to do some serious damage to cross that line. But the fascinating thing here is, this is an attempt by Hyatt to reduce its expenditure on room damage. It may actually increase the expenditure on room damage because of moral hazard, that people will be less careful because they know that they're insured.
What I might like to do is put my feet up and smoke a couple of cigars in the hotel room, right? If they're going to charge me $79, well, that's going to cover that $500 or whatever it is fee for smoking in the room.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and not pick on her. She's got a point, and the conservatives are, of course, swimming around her like sharks right now. The headline from the Washington Examiner, which is a right-wing newspaper in D.C., it doesn't have nearly the pull that the Post has, but it's nice to have an alternative voice nonetheless. Here, I think they're all wet because the headline is AOC laments insane cost of being Congresswoman despite $174,000 salary. People are going to think, oh my God, she makes $174,000. And yeah, to some degree, that's an issue. But ask yourself, can you live in Washington, D.C. on $174,000?
No, I've lived in the Washington, D.C. area. I can tell you that's tight. And it's not just that, James. She has to maintain a residence back in her home state also.
That's exactly correct. So not only does she have to live on $174,000 in D.C., you're not buying anything. You're going to rent something, and it's going to cost a lot, and it's probably going to be far away from where you happen to work because, you know, those apartments right up on Capitol Hill, those really cost. So when she says it's $174,000 and it's not enough, she's right. It's not enough D.C. only, but you add in another home on top of that back in her own district. Come on. I remember reading some stories just a couple of years ago about a bunch of guys in the Senate who shared rooms. I mean, you have to realize she's not wrong about everything every day. I mean, she comes closer than most people, but she hasn't said anything unreasonable. Mm-hmm. There's another headline from the AP that says Ocasio-Cortez navigates the expectations that come with fame. And that's right, too. These are difficulties. She's a young woman. This is like the first real job she's ever had. You can't expect the moon and the stars here. She's doing the best she can. Now, politically, I disagree with her on almost every point. But that doesn't mean we have to be obnoxious to her. It just means we disagree.
People get bent out of shape about politicians making money, becoming rich off of politics. And I think there's something to be said. And at some point, I'd like to do an episode that looks into this fact that people who serve in Congress go in regular people and come out millionaires, generally speaking. That's something I'd like to look at. But when it comes to the salary, you know, you're talking $179,000 or whatever it is, that's peanuts. That's nothing compared to the big money, which apparently comes from them serving on boards of directors or whatever it is after they leave Congress. But here's the thing. When I was in West Virginia, there was a similar discussion there about West Virginia's state legislators making so much money and so forth. It wasn't anything like $179,000. It was big for West Virginia, whatever the number was. People were focused on that, like they're focused on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's $179,000. They said, well, this should be less money. Yeah, there's an unintended consequence here. And the unintended consequence is you knock that wage down further and further. And all of a sudden, regular middle-class people can't afford to serve in Congress.
Yeah,
because the only way you can get there is if you're independently wealthy.
And I think that people don't think that one through.
Yep.
It's worth thinking through because it works exactly as you just explained. And if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can't be the foolishness of the week this time out, well, thank God in heaven we've got Jill Biden. Sorry, Dr. Jill Biden. Do you ever insist people call you Dr. Davies?
In social settings, absolutely not. In academia, I do. They're my students. We're there for a particular thing. I'm the expert in the room. I think that's necessary.
I used to. When I was younger, I wasn't that much older than my students. I did everything I could to drive wedges between us, right? So I would show up wearing a jacket and tie. I would refer to everybody as Mr. or Miss, and I demanded to be Dr., but more preferably Professor Harrigan, these sorts of things, right? But the older I get, the less of a wedge I need to put between us. I mean, I'm an old guy now. You get a different kind of dynamic when you talk in front of a group of young people. So no, I just don't care at all anymore. Dr. Jill Biden says, and this is a headline from the UK, he had so many hopes. Jill Biden voices frustration at Joe's lack of progress in the White House. As she says, he's been sidetracked by Ukraine, Roe versus Wade, and gun violence. The argument is that poor Joe had so many good ideas, but these things happened, and he didn't get to work on the things he wanted. So I guess Joe lives in the real world with the rest of us,
right?
Where we can't wake up in the morning and declare how things are going to be. And, you know, if you think you're going to be president, and Joe Biden, he knew better. He'd been in the Senate for, 185 years. He knew that presidents pay a heavy price. He was vice president for Obama for 8 years. He saw this up close and personal. I don't understand why on earth Dr. Jill Biden is so insistent that we give him a break when we would do that for exactly no one else in that position. She gets the foolishness of the week. And I found her dissertation, and I got it up here on the screen at the house, and I said, I'm going to read this dissertation until the first obvious mistake.
Okay.
How far in do you think I got?
I've heard from other people who have read it, and based on that, I would guess you got half a page.
Second sentence.
Oh, my God, really?
In sentence 2, see if you can figure out what the problem is. The needs of the student population are often undeserved, resulting in a student dropout rate of almost 1/3.
The needs are undeserved?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she wanted to say underserved.
Oh, right, sure.
Which would make a lot more sense in context. In the interest of fair play, I do hereby promise to read this thing, and I will talk about it next week in the Patreon material, where I could actually speak my mind a little more freely than I can here. I'm sure you're going to bleep out at least 17 things I've already said.
I'd be interested to hear what you say.
As you bleep things out, just think that you can go yourself every time you do that. Every time. On that happy note, we move on.
To get more Ant and James, buy a copy of our excellent book, Cooperation and Coercion. You can find the paper and electronic versions on Amazon and the audio version on Audible. If you'd like to support Words and Numbers, make your way over to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers, where you can contribute to our podcast-making habits. If you'd like to schedule us to come speak at your event, be it corporate or educational, or have James officiate at your wedding, send us an email at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. I want to talk this week about Social Security. You and I have mentioned many times in the past and written in quite a few number of op-eds on the fact that Social Security is going to be insolvent within the next 13 to 15 years.
Their own people say, 13 to 15 years, you just
right.
said? Is that built on rosy assumptions? Is that built on dire assumptions?
No, that's their baseline assumptions. They give 3 estimates, one of baseline assumptions and one of half and half assumptions and one of rosy assumptions. And there's not a lot of difference there.
Okay, so we could take for granted that these are actually pretty good numbers.
Yeah, these are the ones they hold out, and the numbers have stayed pretty steady for as long as we've been looking at this, which is over a decade now.
No, that's right.
They'll fluctuate plus or minus a year here and there. Basically, we're talking about 13 to 15 years. What I thought would be good to do is to lay out a plan that you and I have talked about in the past, and I sat down and I did the numbers on it this weekend so we can go into some detail. And this is a plan to shut down Social Security without, and I underline, without denying benefits to any of the people who are expecting benefits.
Right, and that's really important. People plan their lives around this thing. Yanking the rug out from under them at this point would be immoral, but it might be tantamount to murder in some respects.
Picture someone who's 66 years old and has done the same job all his life, maybe doesn't have much of an education. This guy's depending on Social Security. You take that away from him and we've got some serious problems.
And think about somebody whose wife has died, whose children are all strewn about the country, if he even has any.
Right.
And you see just what a big deal this is. Had he known, he could have prepared for that a long time ago. He can't prepare for that now.
That's right.
People who yell about how Social Security is a terrible idea, sure, stipulated, but that doesn't help us get around it. And you're pointing us to what we'd actually need to do without laying anybody's lives to waste.
Right. This plan that we're going to outline pays for everyone who's expecting Social Security as it's phasing out. And here's the fascinating part about this. When you're done, not only does this plan make workers better off, it makes the government better off. It's win-win across the board here. And the reason it can be a win-win across the board is because, and this is something people don't appreciate, Social Security is an abysmal investment. Social Security has a calculator where you can put in how much you earn over time and how much benefits you can expect. The rate of return on Social Security is less than 1% above inflation.
You got to be kidding me.
Oh, and that's a rosy number because it assumes you live to age 100.
Oh, for crying out loud.
You die before 100, your return's even less than that.
All right, let me ask you a simple question. Take all that money over the same period of time and just dump it into either a Dow index fund or an S&P 500 index fund. Where are we at then?
That's where I'm going.
Okay.
Historically speaking, bonds return around 3% above inflation.
It's okay, but it's not great.
It's not great, but they're bonds, which means they're much safer than stocks are. And that's a trade-off, of course. If you want a better return, you're going to have something that's more risky. But stocks yield, on average, about 7% above inflation. You take a mix of stocks and bonds, and you can be at something like 5% above inflation.
If we're at 5%, what does the compounding interest look like?
That's where it's very interesting. I have to launch into the details of the plan now. The plan is people will continue to pay into Social Security as they do now until age 40. When you hit age 41, you don't pay into Social Security anymore. But you also don't get any benefits. So if we turn the knob on this proposal today, some person who just joined the workforce at age 22, he's going to pay in until he's 40 years old. And at age 41, he stops paying in, but he gets no benefits when he retires. And people lose their minds, say, oh my God, what's he going to do? Well, this is where you come in. We take that money that he would have been paying into Social Security, and you put it into stocks and bonds. You put it into an IRA. The infrastructure is already built for doing this.
That's right.
If you run the math on this, he ends up, when he retires, being able to withdraw an amount that's 15% higher than what he would have gotten from his Social Security benefits.
And that's figured at that 5% figure that you gave.
Yeah, that's assuming the 5%, a mix of stocks and bonds, yeah.
And over time, 5% is a reasonably safe idea.
Yeah.
We're always going to be close enough to that, minus really drastic issues in the financial markets.
That's correct.
But if I heard you right, that first generation of this new plan, we're going to have those people coming in and people dropping out of Social Security for about 30 years.
Oh, it's much longer than that. This whole thing is going to require anywhere from 60 to 100 years to play out.
Well, how can that possibly be the case if people get bumped out of it when they're 41 years old?
Well, because if we turn the switch on this thing today, we turned it on, we've got to pay for all the people who are currently retired.
Correct.
People who are, as of today, 41 years old, they would continue paying into Social Security and receiving benefits. This plan would only be affecting the people who are 40 years old and younger.
So the reason why would be that, yes, 30 years or so until we stop adding people to the rolls, but then it would be another bunch of years before they all aged out.
That's correct. Look, it's a long time, but this is what it's going to take to unwind this without throwing anybody to the curb.
Sure.
You could say 100 years is a long time, 90 years is a long time, but that's how long Social Security's been around. That's the magnitude of the problem we got to unwind here. But I want to go back to our young worker today and how this plan would affect him. So picture somebody who's 22 years old today, just joining the workforce, and this plan starts tomorrow. He's paying into Social Security, 12.4%, him plus his employer. He reaches age 41, he's no longer paying in, but the same 12.4% is now going into a private account. By the time he hits age 67, now I'm talking about the median worker here, he will have built up in his private retirement account over $340,000. And he starts drawing down on that, and he can actually draw down more than he would have received from Social Security. That's one of the big pluses to him. There's another big plus to him, which is, under current rules, when you die, your Social Security benefits terminate. Yes, if you have minor dependents, they get something, but your retirement benefits are done. It's like having a 100% death tax. Under this plan, when this guy dies at whatever the expected age is, 78, 80 or something, this median worker is going to still have $250,000 in the bank, which he can then leave to his children, to his heirs.
Or he can spend it however he wants later in life.
Yeah, if he wants, he could spend it at a higher rate. This is where it's so important that Social Security as it exists is a horrible investment. It is such a bad investment that the median worker is actually better off paying in until age 40 and then walking away, saying, I give up all rights to my future benefits, just stop taxing me. Let me put that money into an IRA. That's how bad of an investment Social Security is.
It almost seems, Ant, like you can throw a dart at a financial newspaper and just pick whatever you've got under the dart, and it's probably going to do better.
Oh, absolutely it
over
will.
time, because this is a garbage investment. Notice I didn't say it's a garbage program. It's a garbage investment. And we need to come up with something better.
People are going to lose their minds when we talk about investing in stocks and bonds. They're going to say, as people do, look, these stocks and bonds are risky, Social Security is not. To which I respond, no, it's actually the other way around. Stocks and bonds are safer than Social Security. How do I know this? I know this because Social Security itself has told me it's going to be insolvent in 13 to 15 years. Now, there are individual stocks and bonds that will go bankrupt, but my portfolio as a whole doesn't go away.
And you can have bad years and you can have good years in a private portfolio. You can make any number of bonehead decisions that will come back on you, but that's your money. It should be on you to manage it to the highest degree of possibility. And if you can't do it, go hire someone who can. There are people who make their livings doing this.
And there's a good criticism there of, well, what do you do about people who aren't savvy with investing and all of a sudden they've got this money and they're going to invest it in something and lose it, and they'll hit age 67, they've got nothing left. You can get around that by saying, fine, you've got just 12.4%. You are required to put it into an IRA. You can also say you're required to put it into an IRA to be managed by a professional portfolio manager.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that idea.
Well, I do too, but I like it better than what we've got going now.
You're giving the federal government the ability to pick the winners in financial advice. I think that all ends badly. We can shelve that for now. God knows that's not the important part. The primary concern is doing it.
One of the things people are going to say, rightly so, is, look, what happens to the government's tax revenues? Because you've got these people, when they hit age 41, they're no longer paying the 12.4% into Social Security. And what happens is the government takes a hit. Tax receipts, specifically payroll tax receipts, will drop by roughly $25 billion a year until everybody's through the system. And when everybody's through the system, the federal government is down $680 billion a year. So it's $680 billion of revenue the government has lost from this plan. For someone who's concerned about the government finances here, which you should be, that's a non-starter. $670 billion, that's like the annual cost of the Department of Defense. Except, over time, the Social Security payroll tax receipts decline. But what also declines is the Social Security retirement expenditures.
Sure.
Because people who are on Social Security are dying and nobody's being added to it. What happens is, long term, we end up in a space where Social Security tax revenues have declined by $670 billion a year, but Social Security expenditures have declined by $1.1 trillion. In other words, long term, once everybody's through the system, the federal government is better off to the tune of over $400 billion a year.
And the only people in the entire country who could listen to everything that we've just said and say to himself, oh God, no, we can't have this, are all the Democrats and Republicans in Congress.
Yeah, it becomes not an economic or financial problem, but a political problem.
That's correct.
Their goal is not to cause Social Security to persist. It's not to help people in their retirement. It's to get elected.
And however they can spend that money to achieve that goal, they will do. They'll be lying to you when they say that they can fix Social Security. They cannot.
And here we have with Social Security a rare instance in which the thing that the government is giving us is such poor quality that if we transferred to a private system, the quality would improve to such an extent that everybody's better off, not just the median worker, the poor worker, the rich worker, but also the government. Everybody's better off. That's how bad of a plan Social Security currently is.
The government as a singular unit.
Right.
The government as 535 legislators, not a chance. They can look at this in the House and in the Senate, and they will never go for this.
And that's unfortunate because this plan takes roughly 90 years to pay for itself. So it becomes cash flow positive after 50 years, but it's going to take 90 years before it pays for itself. If we wait 10 years to implement it, the problem is going to be even worse. And so we may not be talking about it taking 90 years to pay for itself. We may be talking about it taking 150 years to pay for itself. I don't know.
We're already at the great-grandchildren of the people serving in Congress. That's who will benefit. This is not going to happen. They're not going to go for this.
There are criticisms we can lob at this around the edges, like Social Security handles more than just retirement benefits. It handles disability benefits. It handles minor dependents of wage earners who have died. All that sort of thing I'm kind of holding out because those functions of Social Security are important, but they're smaller than this major function, which is dealing with the retirement.
Yeah.
And if we can just get this retirement plan under control like I'm describing, the government, now remember, the government's going to be sitting on an extra $430 billion a year that it wouldn't have been sitting on otherwise. That could go a long way to bolstering disability insurance and survivor's insurance.
These are secondary concerns, and I'm happy to keep pushing them off to keep our eye on the primary concern, which is always the hard one, right? If you're looking to get something done, whatever it is that covers 85 to 95% of what you're looking to cover, that's the right answer. You get to the leftovers tomorrow.
And that brings me to what I think is the greatest criticism here and why I think this plan will not work. It has nothing to do with the economics, has nothing to do with the finance. It has to do with the politics. If by the grace of God, this plan were initiated tomorrow, it's a 90-year plan to pay for itself. How many Congresses will exist between now and then? Each one of them looking to get elected by promising their voters all sorts of things. And what's going to happen is that this 90-year plan is not going to survive unchanged for more than 5.
The answer to your question is 45 Congresses. And good luck with that.
Yeah.
We all know what it would take to fix this. And trust me, everybody in Congress knows what it will take to fix this.
I guess so, but it heartens me to see in black and white that there is a path out. There is a way that it could be done.
Yeah, sure. Keep your eye out at aier.org for a written piece about this in the not-too-distant future.
Yes.
And you can read that and maybe crawl into it a little more deeply. I think you're right. The economics, the finance of it, you can make that work. It's the politics that you can't make work. Start saving for your retirement because the people who administer Social Security are already warning you that in 15 years, they will not be able to make the payroll.
And let me say 2 heartening things for our older and for our younger listeners. For the older listeners, my guess is it's most likely that Congress will not cut benefits to the elderly. They're going to increase the payroll tax.
That's right.
Which is bad news for younger people. But for younger people, I do have some heartening news, and it's this. If you'd perform similar analyses to what I've been doing here to your own finances, it turns out, and I'm quoting actual numbers here. If you're an average American at 20 years old with a high school diploma, that's it, no college. If you save 15% of your paycheck, every single paycheck, 15%, and you invest it in stocks and bonds, you'll be a millionaire before you're retired. And if you work to age 70, you'll actually retire with $2.5 million in the bank, and that's adjusted for inflation. The moral of this story here is, if you're a young person, even if you're looking at the Congress is going to raise the payroll taxes, if you can manage to put aside the 15%, start immediately, that's the important thing. You don't have to worry about Social Security one way or the other.
Let's just stop right there. We can, for once, stop on a happy note, and everybody can forget about how they will have none of their retirement subsidized by the federal government.
That's right.
Oh, wait. That's not it. That's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Be sure to stick with us until next week, when Anthony will try to pull the wool over your eyes yet again with his happy, optimistic nonsense. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. You can join the Words and Numbers Backstage group on Facebook. That's always a happy place to go. And you can
send us happy, optimistic email at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person. Just one. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.